one of the biggest issues I think that Oakland is facing is around housing. And big shout out to Causa, who's a Just Cause that started as Just Cause Oakland, right? And really is one of the very first at the forefront of trying to bring more tenant protections across this country, but started here in Oakland with Just Cause laws. And last year with Measure V, we were able to extend some of those Just Cause laws to protect more tenants across the city. And in Oakland, much like many big metropolitan cities across the country, and Oakland is medium-sized, city, but 60% of our folks and our residents here are tenants, right? They're renters. So that's the majority of Oakland. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't really get, is that most cities, big cities, urban cities are renters. Not a lot of people can own. And so, those Just Cause laws coming in really has protected Oaklanders for a really long time, and has changed. Like I got evicted from my last place that I lived about 6 years ago now, and he just didn't want to renew my lease. So he told me I had a month to get out, and I wasn't protected. He couldn't evict me on cause because I paid my rent on time. I took care of the place, and I wasn't a nuisance or all of the things that they try to make reasons to evict people. But because of the year that the building was built, right, I wasn't protected at the time. So me and my family had to rush to find a new place to live. And it was a scramble. And thank God, I had friends who were moving out of the place that I'm living in now, and introduced me to the landlord, who happened to just be a very kind person, a kind landlord who, let me move in immediately. And so that's not, that I feel like there are many, many small landlords who are really kind and really great and, really just want somebody who will take care of their investment, and understand it's an investment, right? It's not like they're just making money. That's the way they live their lives, right? That's not their work, is being a landlord. Whereas we have big developers in Oakland who have impacted our lives hugely. So backtracking again to 2000, when folks were being told to lock down, right, and shelter in place, and nobody was allowed to move around and work, essentially. And so unless you were considered a essential worker, and then we had this fear that people were no longer going to be able to earn an income and not pay their rent, and what would happen as a result of that. So there was an eviction moratorium that Causa, Just Cause, and many other housing organizations in Oakland really fought for. And I believe Oakland Tenants Union was a part of that, right? To really fight for eviction moratorium to be put in place. And thankfully, City Council and Alameda County both decided to do that. But now we are past that point in the pandemic, right? We're with COVID in our lives, where we're no longer in lockdown, and the moratorium has ended. Could you share a little bit, Thomas, about what that means for folks, because and what folks need to know right now, maybe that folks can understand a little bit about the moratorium and why it ended the way it ended.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely speak to that. Yeah, so first I'll just say, it officially ended just a couple weeks ago at midnight on Saturday, July 15th. It feels like a weird time for it to end. I think people are confused about that, and kind of rightfully so. It's like in the middle of a month, and then, but yeah, so coming up tomorrow, I mean, when you think about it, will be like the first month where rent is becoming due in the post eviction moratorium kind of world, August 1st. And so the way that the eviction moratorium ended, it ended in a kind of two kind of tiered approach, which I think a lot of people haven't heard about yet. So maybe I could just start with explaining that a little bit. But if the eviction moratorium applied to you if you're covered by Just Cause, and thankfully, as Liz mentioned, Just Cause was expanded, so now pretty much covers everyone in a building that is older than 10 years in Oakland, and that includes single-family homes. And if you were protected, if you're in a Just Cause, if you're protected by Just Cause, then you couldn't be evicted during the moratorium for rent, for unpaid rent, if that your inability to pay was in some way caused by COVID and the economic kind of situation that COVID created. You also couldn't, if you were covered under the rent adjustment program, like if you had rent control, which is a smaller subset, but still a lot of people in Oakland, you couldn't get a rent increase that went beyond the yearly allowable increase, which last year was 3%. As of tomorrow, it'll be 2.5%. And the way they ended the moratorium, that piece of it is actually staying in place for a whole another year. So if you are covered under the rent adjustment program, you still cannot get an increase over the allowable increase until the June 30th, 2024. So your landlord can't reach back and do banking and give you a big increase by adding up years in which they didn't give you an increase. They can't claim that they did some improvements on the property and ask for a bigger increase. So that is we're really grateful for that. It's still not the most ideal ending. I think Oakland Tenants Union and Causa, Justa and Centro and ACE, we were all pushing for a much slower approach, a much more phased out approach to the end. We initially wanted it to end the eviction protections that ended July 15th. We wanted them to end more like in September, just with a longer roll down to give us the opportunity to let folks know it's happening, because the biggest issue is just getting the word out and making sure that people understand it. But unfortunately, they're just the city, certain members of the city council just weren't open to that, and it is really unfortunate because, like you said, Liz, we're a majority renter city. There's no district that doesn't have a huge amount of renters in Oakland, and unfortunately, I think that certain city council members just they weren't willing to hear kind of the voices of the tenants who are struggling on that issue, and so we ended up in this kind of middle ground. We're still relatively lucky compared to some other places that didn't even have a local protection, that were just relying on the state protection, but still we have a powerful tenant movement in Oakland, and we deserve kind of we push for the best protections that we can get, and we deserve them, obviously. So, it was a mixed bag, I'll just say.
Well, let's name some of those city council members, because I think folks really need to know which of our city council members really align with us or not. This is factual. It's in the city council notes, but I think digging through that is probably difficult for a lot of folks. So let's name them.
Well, yeah, I think, we ultimately didn't end up getting a floor vote on the actual plan that we wanted, just because the council members that were championing our proposal ultimately knew that they didn't have the votes that night. But, the biggest allies of the tenant movement on the council, I think we know, Carol Fife, Nikki Voss, and Kyle was usually right there with us as well. And I think the newer council members, Jenkins and Ramachandran, they were a little, they expressed trepidation, and they, I think, with varying degrees of believability, I would say, as someone on the other side of that conversation, they expressed, that they wanted to hear both sides and they wanted to be absolutely sure and things like that. In retrospect, I think Jenkins maybe was a little bit more sincere when he was saying that than Ramachandran. But they didn't end up voting. So neither of them, Councilmember Fife kind of called for discussion of that proposal, and no one had any questions that they wanted to ask. Everyone just kind of remained silent. We just didn't have the votes on that, and so that ended the eviction moratorium. There were some other pieces of protections that we were pushing for then as well, and actually Councilmember Jenkins, to his credit, ended up bringing those back to the floor a couple months later, and those passed. I will just say, again, I think Councilmember Ramachandran wasn't even there for that vote. She wasn't even at the council or meeting, or she wasn't present for that specific vote. And then, we all know, Gaio is not going to vote for something like that. And I don't know how Trevor Reed ended up voting, but usually she's in the block on the other side, and sometimes she, kind of fluctuates when it comes to the actual vote and is on a different side, but she's definitely kind of, I would say, in the opposing block of those kind of protections.
Yeah, I was gonna bring in Kaplan.
Yeah, Kaplan is great, but sometimes not always.
Yeah, I think it's been kind of interesting that we're 7 months in and we've seen some a lot of sort of grandstanding on the dais by Janani Ramachandran, council member from District 4. But then at very critical votes, particularly around housing, like the Coliseum Connections issues and around the eviction moratorium, just like being really absent to that conversation. And I wonder, literally absent, not just like not participating in the conversation. And I think like that it's interesting to see that, because it's like, you do have tenants. I believe they're a tenant, too, in District 4. And to assume that all of District 4, which is the Hills, is only homeowners is not true, right? That there are a lot of tenants there as well. And so I want to bring you in on this, Ty. Like, what are you thinking of? What are you feeling about like how this rolled out, and sort of, I think the lack of the city's ability to now, because of the city council not being able to vote on in a way that would help bring awareness to the end of the eviction moratorium, put it on the city. Like, what does that mean for Oaklanders?
Yeah, I think a really prevalent issue in the Bay is just the haves and the have-nots, right? And the Bay Area just has the opportunity to set the standard for a lot of nationwide policies, especially around rental protections. I'm from the Midwest, specifically Ohio, and in my city where I'm from, there's virtually no rental protections. And I'm pretty new to the Bay. I've only been here for 2 years, and I just moved to Oakland in January. And it was shocking seeing all the landlords and their organizing efforts to want to just immediately evict people. And we heard from some landlords and their concerns that their properties are the way that they're making money, and people's housing is not a joke. People's security isn't a joke, and just the sheer belief of being able to profit over 4 walls that someone lives in is pretty gross. I would have liked to see I would have liked to see the eviction moratorium never.
Let's start there, right? Housing is a human right. Let's start there. Let's start with that premise.
Right, let's start there. That's the dream, right? Just to protect our people, and people are really, really poor and struggling out here. The majority of folks that potentially could face eviction they're poor people. They're not folks living in these sky-rise apartments in downtown Oakland. They're single people, there's students, there's families. And I was just very surprised that Oakland wasn't able to really band together to protect the poor folks and the renters, especially myself being a renter. It was really sad and kind of scary. Those
Yeah.
landlords
And that was like
organized
that I think
hell out of each other.
I was really shocked.
So
Just how much, and that this is not to say like there isn't any sympathy for people losing out on their investments, right? Because it is an investment though. Like you take a risk though when you do investments, and I don't like it. I feel like it's not, you should be targeting your anger at this capitalist system where your investment didn't pan out for you, right? Instead, like we're talking about like, oh, it's about these, about the tenants and not paying their rent. And I think a lot of folks sort of like parroted this myth in some way to me that tenants just like, they were like, no eviction moratorium, it doesn't matter. I just don't want to pay my rent. So I'm just going to stop, you know? And to me, it's like, I don't know if that's true. You know, like I'm sure there's some outliers. I'm sure there's circumstances, but it's also like the willingness by landlords, particularly, they call themselves small landlords, right? But who actually propped them up and paid some of these folks to like organize them were developers. Let's be really clear about that, y'all. The money behind small landlords coming out and organizing were propped up by developers with big money, corporations, right? So like, let's not forget that part. And right?
Ebra.
Say that one more time, Thomas.
Yeah. Yeah, the East Bay Rental Housing Association. I mean, it's them. Like, it's one entity. We don't even have to like play around. You know, they paid for all those folks to have those shirts, those signs. They gave them talking points, and it's a little bit sad because they're using these folks, and they don't like offer them like services or any, like they're bringing out these folks. They're bringing out these small mom and pop landlords. You know, they're putting the you know, small mom and pop landlords of color specifically to the front and just railing on that point over and over again. And it's really cynical. But yeah, I mean, they're well capitalized, obviously. And you know, on the flip side, they, like I said, they don't, you know, they're not they're just basically preying on the situation that those few kind of people are in, that are out a lot of money, that are those maybe at risk of losing their properties, those small landlords. But they're not turning around and like helping them get access to funding. And they're telling them basically like, here, they're pointing the finger at the tenants.
That's the problem.
Saying like, here's where you need to go after. But the thing is, the money that these people, if there's tenants that haven't been paying, the money is not there. Like they don't have that money, and like they need to be looking at like the state to make them whole again. And I think that a lot of those folks in those situations, they should be made whole in certain situations, but they need to be like, they need to be asking the state essentially, or the county, or like they need to point the finger at how messed up the state's kind of response to the rent relief was. And you know, it's been like, I'm so grateful for it, but it you know, folks are still waiting on their payments and stuff. So like, it has not been a super successful program. At least they did something, but you know, that's where the funds are at the state level. So I mean, not that they're like, that's where they would be, like you know, these tenants that can't pay, like you know, all these landlords are going to start going after them, and they're going to have to go into, you know, payment plans and things like that. But their money is like, they're not going to get the money out of them because they lost their jobs and they had to pay, you know, they had to prioritize like surviving. And so it's not like they just saved up all that rent.
They're like, they're like
sitting,
rolling in money in their beds, you know, like
invested it.
Yeah.
No, for real. There's been there was so much inflammatory language at council during public comment, and I heard people comparing the eviction moratorium to slavery. I was like, y'all are using some hella inflammatory language about the comparing yourself as a landlord to a slave.
I
is
mean,
crazy.
let's
And
go there. I mean, that's wild,
no
right?
comment.
That I think
Yeah.
that
The
though
language
what
around it was
happens
wild.
though is exactly what you're saying, Thomas, is like there's these developers, they exploit the situation of small landlords, like pay them, and they point at the tenants, and the way you point at them is by using morality, right? You tell them that they are immoral, they are lazy, they don't want, you tell that story over and over and over again, right? That, and they propped up one landlord in the newspaper over and over again for that same story, where the majority of tenants who utilize the eviction moratorium, right, were actually, like you were saying, Thomas, just out of work. So it's not that people don't want to pay their rent. They just can't. And I think like that's and then the morality that it just gets deeper, right? Because it's like, well, why weren't you working? You're so lazy, right? And how many times have we heard that kind of morality used on people of color, on women, on immigrants, on refugees, and all of these people, and reasons for us to go bomb some other country?
Yeah. And yeah, we're definitely conditioned to respond to that. I feel like, you know, obviously in this society, like it's sometimes hard. I even catch myself like hearing those kind of arguments, those appeals to like morality, like you weren't, you know, you weren't pinching your pennies, you weren't doing this, you weren't like hustling in this way. And like, you know, if you don't catch yourself, sometimes you're like, yeah, did I do enough? Like all these things. But I think we need to kind of break out of that conditioning a little and realize that like we need to look to the state a little bit more to like be helping and providing some of these things for us, because obviously we're all working so much. So yeah, it's hard. Like housing isn't this crazy everywhere in the world, but like we are just, you know, that's how it's been here. And
it's wild,
there's a
right?
large contingent of those people, those people with money, and all that, the assets in housing, like they want it to continue to be that way, and they want you to continue to have to like hustle and scramble to like come up with rent every month. And so they don't want that situation to change. And I think that's part of the bigger picture, is like they saw this a little bit as an attack on their position as housing investors. Like they don't want the status quo to change. I think maybe like they see the potential for this, something like with the eviction moratoriums, to be like the starting point in major changes to the way we think about housing in this country. I agree with them on that point. I think it could be, if we really, you know, organize around it and use the momentum. But
I'm curious about, I think some of where folks kind of get lost. And these are some questions I think that people have posed to me and to others around the eviction moratorium, right? Is like, well, was it on good faith that you lost your income? Is there a way for the landlords to receive, support through the eviction moratorium? Now that it's ending, are they going to be able to recoup their money and some of the lost income, or quote unquote lost income? To me, when I think of a moratorium, it's just a pause. It's not actually an elimination, right? Because that's essentially what you're saying, is like, we're just not going to evict you right now. We're preventing that from happening in mass, because what would that mean, right? When we have a city that already has 6,000 homeless folks, 60 to 70% of those folks were already Oaklanders, So like, I wonder about those details so that folks can understand in some detail. And then I want to ask after that, like a little bit about what renters and tenants can do now, knowing that the eviction moratorium is done, where they can get assistance. And even some of those small landlords in Oakland, like, where are they going to get the assistance that they're seeking in terms of both from the state or from the city, from the county, like it's not just in Oakland. It was also eviction moratorium in Alameda County. There's also eviction moratorium at the state level. So what are the things that folks need to know? That was a lot of questions. Sorry. I do that. How about like we'll start with like those pieces around like what do people need to know about, you know, how people accessed or made use of the eviction moratorium. What did it mean? What did it mean for landlords? Because I see in here somebody would put in here like there are protections for these landlords within the moratorium. So what were those protections so that folks can know?
Yeah, the protections for landlords in the moratorium. I mean, like, the rental assistance that came out at from the state level for tenants who could not pay during the early part of the pandemic and the eviction moratorium, like that money went directly to the landlords of those tenants, right? So it wasn't like tenants were being paid like this sum of money and then like pass that on to their landlord and maybe didn't pass it on or something, whatever the claim may be. Like that money like went to landlords directly. So like that's a big part of the assistance that was there. And then, I would just say like personally, I'm not the best person to answer that question. I don't really see, like I totally understand talking about the issue in this way and like making sure we kind of like note that people are hurting on both sides. But like you said, Liz, like we're a 60% renter city. I'm a tenant, I'm an advocate for other tenants, and there's enough work to do on that side of it. So that's kind of what I make myself busy
appreciate
with.
that. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm wondering
yeah.
if you know any of that, Ty, and I understand too. Like Causa's a Just Cause is also a tenant rights organization, so like if you all don't know that, that's cool. And we could keep it moving because I think like that's a big piece of this, right? Is like, and I hear Bleacher Dave in the chat, putting in that, American Project has always been to prevent Black folks from acquiring property. I think if we take even a deeper dive into actually about like like property ownership in the United States is problematic in and of itself in many ways. And so, having landlords and owning property beyond that is interesting. So nobody's saying anybody. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I respond? Is that okay? Can I respond just because I see Bleacher Dave kind of making some comments about what I was saying. I in no way like mean to say that landlords should not be helped and to figure out, because obviously, like I was saying, it's very complicated to rent and to be a renter in Oakland because of the laws that govern it. We need those regulations. And the city has gotten much better about providing information for both tenants and for landlords. So like the rent adjustment program that protects you as a tenant that you have to deal with as a landlord, they offer regular workshops that they do. If you're a landlord in Oakland, you should get on their mailing list if you're not already. They send out once a month probably something about a workshop that you can join. They have like facts and different resources that they develop specifically for landlords and how to navigate the process with the rent adjustment board. And they're a balanced kind of organization. When you have a hearing, it's not weighted towards tenants. They're a neutral kind of public body, and they do put out a lot of information for landlords. But I would just say, to respond to the other point, like about the property question, it's like I'm talking about housing when I'm in this conversation, and when I'm talking with tenants, I'm talking about housing. I'm not really talking about property. And I understand that property is a super valuable tool for people to build wealth and build generational wealth, but like I'm just not concerned with that. Like wealth for me is different than surviving and having basic housing, because the people we're talking about can't even think about building wealth.
And I think the question in the comment really is a straw man, fallacy. If I were to use like debate type like logic, right? Like that's a fallacy to like then say we said that, because that's actually not anything that anybody's saying. So we're not saying that they should be exploited, but we are saying that there are many factors to this, and that as tenants, as 60% of Oaklanders, right, Like if we are not talking about the protection of 60% of Oaklanders and they become evicted, we're going to have an entirely different problem here in Oakland, right? Exactly. Like it is extractive. And so we are on this opportunity where there's something larger that we have to be talking about. These protections are really about being able to not only protect those tenants stay in their homes, in their housing, but it also is protecting Oakland from finding ourselves in a situation where we are unable to handle. It's untenable to even think about 60% of Oaklanders ending up on the street. I know I just went really far with that, but like even in my own logical fallacy, but like, I would just say like, we are seeing that. We are already seeing folks getting eviction like notices, right? And so what does this mean for Oakland, right? If all of these tenants, all of these working class, all of these poor folks, at the beginning of the pandemic, Oakland Rising did a texting program where we texted about 3,000. Oh, we started with like 30,000 Oaklanders. And we kept in touch with them via text, offering resources and giving them information. And that was the biggest thing. We talked to so many other folks in Oakland. And again, I'm going to now ignore everything that Bleacher Dave says because he keeps going to a place that is about, like trying to attack what it is that we're saying. So I'm just going to ignore it. But that tenants at the time, there was so many working class people and middle class people who are like, I'm possibly going to lose my home. And so we actually moved and supporting the eviction moratorium because we were hearing from so many Oaklanders who were not just, poor people, but middle class folks, like working class people, right? Like, I think that's important for folks to understand that. But I know that both Oakland Tenants Union and Causa Justa Just Cause are both looking at like what kind of assistance do folks really need in this moment? Yeah, like, well, what
You're asking,
information do they need and how are you all providing it, right? Because I think you all are doing things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. For folks that don't know, on IG Live, at Causa Justa, we used to have a tenants hotline where we would counsel folks that were struggling with their housing and their landlords, and sometimes act as a mediator. We no longer have tenant counseling in Oakland anymore, but we're seeing a real need for all hands on deck for any counseling that tenants need. I've had several people email me because they're afraid that their landlord is going to evict them when they just don't have the money to pay them rent like they did before the pandemic. I think there's a real need for mutual aid for folks, and just a real need for community and organizing together and talking to each other about what they're struggling with.
And so what I wonder then,
definitely.
so folks can like support Causa Justa so that you all can bring back that hotline again. I know that was really useful for me, 6 years ago when I got evicted, like I called Causa Justa first, that was the first place I called. And then there are other spaces. Are you all doing some workshops or anything like that for folks so that they can learn?
Yeah, we're doing a couple workshops. We haven't scheduled them after the break quite yet. It's not operating on a needs basis, but it just hasn't been put in the calendar yet because we're not sure of how big of a need it'll be, since we also do tenants' rights workshops in San Francisco. But Causa Justa is always a place that folks can call, and we're in the office Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So if you want to give us a call, send us an email. We'll get back to you and make sure you're connected with the folks
Appreciate that.
that can best mitigate these situations. Which tends
So
to
tell us
be
what's OTU doing
OTU.
to assist tenants in Oakland.
Totally, yeah. Well, first I'll just say we have a lot of love and respect for Causa Justa. We've worked with them since going back to that initial campaign that you referenced earlier, Liz, to get Just Cause in Oakland in like 2002 or whenever it was. As far as what Oakland Tenants Union does, over the last few years, we've definitely increased our availability to tenants for advice and counseling. Like Causa Justa, we're not a legal organization. So like I said, OTU is just an organization of tenants in Oakland who know the laws very well. And so we have multiple avenues for advice for tenants who are going through a specific issue with their landlord. So they're always welcome to email us. And you can find all this information on our website. Our website's oaklandtenantsunion.org. We have an email line where you can always email us. We have a phone number where you can call and leave a voicemail with a description of your issue. And then we usually call folks back within 2 days. And then twice a month, we do a virtual advice session on Zoom. And we help around, I think our registration is open to 25 people for each of those sessions. There's usually around 15 people. And it's not one-on-one support. Actually, it's, we go one at a time based on when people show up, and we listen to their issue as a group with all the other tenants listening in as well, and we just talk about what's going on. There's multiple advisors, and we kind of go back and forth about strategy and suggestions, and people find that really helpful, that they can hear other tenants, they hear that they're going through similar situations, they hear different people's ideas and what they've done already. So those are really productive. We do those on the second and fourth Sunday of each month from 3 to 5. And then one Sunday a month, a few counselors are at the Oakland Main Branch Library from 3 to 5 on the first Sunday. And we do the same thing. We do advice. That one is more one-on-one. And then we recently, this year, have started doing one session a month at the West Oakland Library, because they reached out to us and they wanted some specific sessions for the folks over there in West Oakland. And so those are less, they don't have a regular date, but you can check our Instagram. We post all that stuff. So usually about once a month, we're over there as well. And we just try to offer advice. We have discussions with people. We give resource referrals, obviously, this is who you should contact at the city. This is what organization you should reach out to. And we let people know when it's they definitely need to get in touch with an attorney, because sometimes people don't realize that. There's maybe less situations than you might think in which that's the absolute first thing you should do, but there definitely are a lot. There's a lot of them. And if you get a 3-day notice, you should be reaching out to one of the organizations in Oakland that supports with evictions. That would be Centro. That would be Eviction Defense Center, East Bay Community Law Center, and Bay Area Legal Aid would probably be the 4 big
So
ones.
I know there's Bay Area Legal Aid, Centro Legal de la Raza. There is also East Bay Community Law Center, and you said another one? Eviction Defense Center. And then there's also API Legal Outreach.
Yep.
And so those are some organizations you can reach out to if you are in need of help with your eviction and needing legal services. And I will say we are unapologetic about being in defense of tenants and tenant rights in Oakland. There is nothing that anybody can say about that. We need to hear the other side, because in this situation, we are on the side of those who are most marginalized, and that has always been the case for Oakland, has always been the case for Causa Justa, has always been the case, I would say, also for Oakland Tenants Union, right? We are unapologetic about that, because we are the most marginalized in this city in terms of working class, poor people in Oakland. And so just lifting that up for folks to understand that. And we're going to end on that. Appreciate you both. Appreciate you, Ty, for taking, I know this is your CJJC's break time and appreciate you coming on just for this hour. You can follow us at oaklandrising.org, and you can also donate to us by going to oaklandrising.org/donate. Any of that helps us. And just lifting up Oakland Tenants Union, follow their Instagram, lift up Causa Justa Just Cause, follow their Instagram so that you can continue to hear the situation, and we'll keep continuing to push City Council and the administration as well as the Board of Supervisors to protect tenants in Oakland and in Alameda County. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you for having us. Be well.